You are tuned to the Nighttime Podcast, focused on the fringe of Canada.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to my ongoing series exploring the Nova Scotia shooting and arson rampage. For tonight's episode, I'm going to share another conversation I had with investigative journalist Paul Palango. The recording you'll hear occurred on the evening of Sunday, August 22nd, and was broadcast live on the Nighttime Podcast YouTube channel. Now, our conversation covers a lot of ground and includes several call-ins from the viewing audience, so no need for a setup. Let's just dive right into it. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, Paul Palango and I will again discuss recent developments related to the Nova Scotia shooting and arson rampage.
22 innocent people were killed at the hands of a gunman, and 3 people were injured. Some of those who lost their lives did so while trying to save others. These incidents happened in a rural area of Nova Scotia, which is Portapique. Police received its first 911 call with a report of a shooting at a home in the area. Several police units responded to the area, and upon arriving, they located several people who were deceased. There were also several structures that were already fully engulfed in flames. Fairly early into our involvement, we learned of a possible suspect. It was only after 6:30 in the morning when a victim emerged from hiding. We confirmed more details about Gabriel Wardman. This included the fact that he was in possession of a fully marked and equipped replica RCMP vehicle and was wearing a police uniform. We also learned that he was in possession of several firearms that included pistols and long-barreled weapons.
Paul Palango, it's been 7 days, but man, as usual, a lot has happened. How have you been?
Busy. I mean, I've been a glass artist this week, making all kinds of glass stuff, and just doing a million things with this story. You know, it's been quite a busy week.
Well, we'll jump right into it. I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this yet, but I heard from a little bird that you spent the weekend, or at least some of the weekend, in Portapique. What's up?
I went to Portapique yesterday. I have still things I got to talk to people, learn things. One of the things I wanted to do is go and remeasure the distances Corey Ellison spot where he was killed to where he left his father's place to where he was hiding. And it really, I understand what Clinton Ellison was saying. He said there wasn't enough time to fit the RCMP timeline, as they call it, the flexible timeline. And, looking at it, I really do think there should be a separate police investigation, because things don't really add up about Corey Ellison. Yeah, Wardman may well have shot him, but there's too much doubt in there with the timelines now. And where that would really, what we really need to see, whether the Mass Casualty Commission will puff itself up to its full height and call for these things, is a thorough analysis of Corey Ellison and Clinton Ellison and Richard Ellison's phones, because they should have the timelines on them, unless the RCMP fiddled with that. Because, I've been told for the last 15 months they were fiddling with things like that to sort of doctor evidence. And you think, oh, that's conspiracy theory. Well, we know, Jordan, we've found a lot of things that aren't conspiracy theory anymore. They're actually
not exactly theory. Yeah. And even if you can get, especially from these pivotal points of that night, if you can get just a couple definitive times and then kind of like lay that over the map of Portapique to get an idea of how long it takes you to walk or drive from spot to spot, you can really start to, knock off some mistruths within the stories. I think being there, it's good that you're able to go there and actually poke around.
Yeah, I go and, I have people actually like me there. Not everyone doesn't, not everyone's against me, so I can go and sit on people's porch and have a beer and talk about things. I mean, one of the other things I learned that I didn't even realize was that Peter Griffin's father, Alan Griffin, was, I haven't confirmed this, but I've been told by a reliable source that he was a volunteer firefighter. And why is that important? Well, there were fires all around him. And, he's the kind of guy who would have called for help right away or gone to investigate because that's in his nature.
And in his neighborhood.
The first timelines had, and the first the ITOs came out, had him calling for the fire department at 9:15. And then they said, oh, no, that was 9:15, it was 10:15. But it doesn't make sense. There were fires before 10 o'clock. We don't know when before 10 o'clock, because we know that when Jamie Blair was on the phone at 10:01 with 911, she's talking about fires. Mm-hmm. So the fires were already going at his house, according to the timeline, at his house in the warehouse. So when did this all start? That's another thing we don't know.
Yeah. And if memory serves me right, in Jamie Blair's call, the 911 attendant, or whatever the name for that the occupation is they were aware. I think there's a moment where they call like someone else, and we hear them talk about like what's going on in Portapique. So it was going on, like there was enough already happening by that phone call that people, at least in that office, were aware of it.
Well, absolutely. And then the RCMP has made it sound like it all began at 10:01, and they got there at 10:26. That's not true. Mm-hmm. But why are they hiding what happened before? Well, we'll speculate that on when we talk about the story, this week's story in frame. The second thing that happened was, this always happens to me. Sharon and I were on our way back, and we said, okay, let's stop for dinner. It's like 6:30. So we stopped at a place for dinner somewhere between Halifax and Portapique, maybe in Halifax. And the server was a very pleasant person, and we got talking over the course of dinner, and as the restaurant emptied out, and one thing led to another, and she talked about listening to murder podcasts. And I said, oh, do you listen to the nighttime podcast with Jordan Bone? And she put it into her phone. And then we got talking about what's your interest. I says, well, Portapique. I said, I got a question for you. And she says, what? And I says, what is your impression of what happened that weekend? And she said, well, my first impression was it was another one of these nasty guys who beat up his girlfriend, went crazy, the same old story. Sad, blah, 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 all these violent guys, blah, 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 blah. But then it started to change. Now my opinion has changed. I said, well, why has it changed? And she said, because I've heard the other stuff about the police lying, the 911 tapes, all this stuff. Now I think there was something else going on. And I said, well, where did you hear that? She says, everywhere. And then I pointed out that I was the person responsible for that. And then that sort of led her into telling me something really interesting. Oh. That one of her best friends dated Wortman.
Wow.
And
add that to the list.
Well, that's it. That's the second one in 2 weeks. Like new bodies in the story. And that this woman was quite distraught about what had happened. She had told this woman that she had never seen any problems with him, any violent behavior, nothing, that he's a gentleman and really nice, da, 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 da. And this is the stuff I picked up along the way, but this guy had unbelievable success with women, considering all the things said about him, and that he liked to, he bragged about making bodies disappear and whatever he said he could do. And he was an abject criminal for 20 years. So he's a bit complicated. But anyway, she's telling me this story. So, that this adds to this other backstory that sort of flies in the face or challenges the domestic violence story. There's no doubt he could be still be a violent person. but it weakens, to my mind, in my mind, the domestic violence story. That he was a cad, probably a satyr, to use an old word. He was getting, I don't even know when he was home or when he had time for a relationship with Lisa Banfield, because he seemed to spend a lot of time visiting different women all over the province.
I just see someone in the chat left a comment that says he loved women in the game of chase, not the abusive choke you kind of guy. And the person that says that in the chat has good reason to know, is my understanding. So it's it seems like he's.
I think I know who that is, and I would love to talk to her, but she refuses to talk to me. And then the next thing that came up, there was an accident in Onslow, Belmont, where the Onslow Belmont Fire Hall responded. I think it was yesterday, and the police who showed up, one of the policemen was the guy who shot up the Onslow Belmont Fire Hall and almost killed everyone. So some of the fire department guys were really upset that this guy was still in the force. It's still there. Stories that we may report on later. You can be assured of that the rabid dogs of the Nova Scotia media won't be on it, because that's not their kind of story. And then finally, what else happened? Oh yeah, then there's I don't know if it's one of our listeners, or one of our audience, called into the Todd Vino show. So people who don't know who Todd Vino is, there's the Rick Howe show, is the premier call-in show in Halifax, in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And Rick Howe got sick earlier this year, and then he took a leave of absence. Now he's retiring, and everyone loved Rick. He's a journalist, but he was nobody's fool, and he played a straight game. Anyway, Todd comes in to replace him, and Todd is I understand he's an ex-military guy, so he finds it really difficult dealing with police stories or military stories or critical stuff. And so anyway, this woman called, and I didn't hear this, but when one of my employees did. I was just out of the room at the time. She said this woman called and started yelling at Todd for being so boring, and why does he have that Paul Palango guy on, because he tells the truth. And Todd said, I may be wrong, but just my employee said he said this, that he's pretty controversial. And I think, well, why the hell do you have, that summed it up right there. Why the hell do you have a talk radio show in Nova Scotia where they avoid people who are quote unquote controversial? And what is the controversy about what I've said? I've been right. I said they're lying. Yeah. I proved they're lying. The controversy is that the police are lying and nobody really wants to deal with it in the media. That's the controversy. So interesting. You understand why it just boggles my mind, but it says so much about Nova Scotia and Canadian media.
They're missing the point, because the whole point of it, that talk radio show, is you want to have the controversial topic, so both sides want to listen and get involved and talk. So if you are that controversial, he's missing the buck big time.
But they don't want to, because it's part of blackball. I'm not allowed to write or talk or even be quoted in local media in Nova Scotia. Why? Because I said I have theories about what's going on here, and then as I stalked down those theories, I was able to prove some of them were correct, and even beyond my wildest imagination. But you're not allowed to do that. You're not playing. You're not playing within the rules.
Yeah, I think my thought is they don't like to report on stories that either they didn't break or aren't public, press release kind of stuff.
They don't come from official documents.
Yeah, exactly. And if it isn't coming from an official document and it's a story that somebody broke, I feel like they don't want to pat that person on the back by adding credibility to whatever it is they've done. I see that so many times with people like you who are sort of the freelance writer type. It's you can work for them and break the story for them, or stay out of town and get out of their way while they write about the press release.
Well, there's another story going on right now. I was going to talk about it later, but it's in this vein. the Saulnier case has come back in Moncton, Dieppe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been stories this week about the court case and how the family can't get deal with the estate because they can't get a police report or coroner's report on a murder that happened almost 2 years ago now. And as you may recall, last September, I wrote a story in the National Post about how the Saulniers were agents or were informants and reported their son's activities at one of their houses. And the RCMP and Joint Forces did a raid, arrested a bunch of biker type people. And then on the night they were charged, September 6th, the Bernard and Rose Saulnier were murdered the same night. And it was really a bad scene. And from my sources, I got that this had a connection to the RCMP and something had happened. So this is all being covered up. So then it was reported this week in local papers and elsewhere. They ignore all of that stuff. They don't even try to confirm it. In fact, this is the sort of the CBC story really stuck out to me. Like, I clearly reported they were murdered on the night everyone was charged. And the way they reported is, they were murdered 10 days after the arrest or the raid, 10 days after the raid. Well, I think the specifics of the juxtaposition of the arrests and the murders really is important, just a small detail. But the media in their wisdom ignores that because it's not in an official document. You actually have to look at two different things and put them together. And they don't feel competent to do that.
It can be tricky work.
People were charged, people were murdered. Look at the time they were charged, look at their murder. It's all connected to the same thing. Might it be related? No, we don't want to report that because that might be too salacious. When actually it informs the reader about what was really going on,
Mm-hmm. Speaking of putting articles together and breaking news, you had a busy week in Frank. Did you not have two separate articles this week? Did you have one early in the week?
No, I had one in previous weeks. And
okay, I'm getting to
this one was, I used basically Andrew Douglas's story about the RCMP withdrawing from the Joint Force Integrated Homicide Unit.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I forgot that one of them was by Andrew. I read two this week, but one was Andrew's.
Yeah, and so that's a really important story because it really sort of fit right with what the story I wanted to tell. I've been wanting to tell. It's the incredible shrinking RCMP. So you got this force that is not involved in major operations across Canada. And now you're in Nova Scotia, they're withdrawing from the Integrated Homicide Unit.
So just to give context, what is the Integrated Homicide Unit?
Well, when the police forces were amalgamated in 1996 in Nova Scotia, the municipal ones, Bedford, Dartmouth, Halifax, and they created, there's a creation of other little municipal forces. Then the RCMP ran some smaller municipalities who were the provincial police force, etc. One of the weird decisions that was made at the time was, well, instead of amalgamating all the forces in Halifax, we'll have Dartmouth, Bedford, and Halifax will become the Halifax Regional Police. But in Halifax County, the RCMP will continue to be the police there. And so you have this weird setup now in Halifax where you have actually two police forces overlapping in the same jurisdiction. And so the decision was made that there would be an integrated homicide unit, integrated major crimes unit. And so like 75% of that is HRP and 25% or so is 25% is RCMP when you can find them, because they're not, they're not the most vigilant or diligent police force. That if the teacher was taking attendance, they would have been sort of the what do they call it? He caught playing hooky quite often. Anyway,
Okay.
and this was a big issue back in the 90s because into the 2000s, because Frank Beasley, who was the chief back then, did an audit of what was going on in the RCMP side of things, and he couldn't find members. They said, "Oh, we had 90 members in Tantallon and Enfield and whatever," and he'd go and look at the numbers at their roster and say, he'd find the same officer on the roster in here in Vancouver and at Toronto Airport or something like that. The same person. They were like, the triple booking these people, which is essentially a fraud because the taxpayers in Nova Scotia are paying for a full body, but there's no accountability. You couldn't find out where they were. So what happened was, you thought Frank tried at that time to push for amalgamation, so the RCMP are pushed out of Halifax County. But the powers to be didn't want to do that because they thought, oh, that'll be too expensive. We're going to have to buy all that RCMP stuff, and we'd have to buy it of the contracts, buy this, buy that. It's the same taxpayer paying for everything, It's a bullshit argument. But what happened after that, when Beasley went, what did the powers to be do? They hired Jean-Michel Blais, from the RCMP to be the police chief in Halifax, as if this was going to fix things. And that didn't fix things at all. And now we're in the situation where they're supposed to be working together and the RCMP is pulling back. So you got to ask yourself, why are they pulling back? And all my sources, I leapt on that and I talked to a bunch of people. And they said it has to do with Portapique and the fallout of Portapique. So that we don't know for sure because nobody puts this stuff in writing. The RCMP says, oh, we're going to do this because we can do a better job by ourselves. Not true. Because the RCMP, like, as I said in the story, naive Canadians or naive anyone looking at this would say the RCMP and Halifax police are working together. Well, the Mounties are bringing all their know-how to the job. That's not how it works. It's the municipal police, whether it's Halifax, Toronto, Edmonton, Vancouver, anywhere where there's joint forces operations. It's the municipal police who teach the Mounties how to do the job. Because the Mounties in their job description, they're not specialists. They're absolute generals, and there is no specialization. So you see these botched cases all the time involving the RCMP because they're not specialists. So getting back to Portapique, what I've learned was that HRP is saying we're not going to go along with it. We're not going to lie for you. And this has made the RCMP really nervous. And then the second thing that's going along is that the word inside the HRP and from a Mountie source is that the word on the street is that Halifax is going to push the Mounties out of Halifax County, which would be devastating to them.
Why? What I don't get though is why would the RCMP be in Halifax if we have our own city police?
Well, it's part of the old contract system. So they police the rural areas, and so it was a decision made, before 1996 the amalgamation. The RCMP were already policing Halifax County, and for those who don't understand the geography of Nova Scotia, Halifax County is huge. It's like the size of Prince Edward Island. It's massive. And I think it has roughly the same the mileage or square kilometers as PEI. So Halifax, they had their own police force policing the urban areas, and the RCMP were in the rural areas. But the rural areas over the last 25, 30 years have become the urban area too. And the RCMP basically has a different model of policing that is really not conducive to policing urban areas because they under-police, they don't have a lot of manpower or woman power, and they're always struggling to do the job. And that's not what you want in an urban area. And we see how well that worked out in the rural area in Portapet too.
Exactly right. You also had some information or some news that I saw put out about Dustine Rodier this week. I don't know if it's news or what the story is, but what's going on with her? In your search for information related to her whereabouts and activities at the night of the rampage.
Is saying in an email, I put 9 or 10 pointed questions to them about Rodier, and they said, "Oh well, she wasn't missing on the morning of the 19th. Everything was fine. There was a lot going on, et cetera, et cetera." And then Andrew and I had to put another letter back to the RCMP and say, "Well, wait a second. In your access to information FOIPOP request from Elizabeth McMillan of the CBC, in those requests, in those documents, it says they couldn't find Rodier." So we still don't have a clear answer as to what was going on with Rodier. We're still pursuing her.
That's been weeks now that you've been teasing it. I'm just dying to get the news. I'm ready to call myself.
I mean, if you notice, like the story this week, we looked at, the devolution of the integrated homicide unit. And my sources said that other units are being dismantled as well. And the RCMP is going to do it on their own. This is like, we have a new government in Nova Scotia. You think they would notice some of this going on instead of saying, we love our Mounties. We'll do anything to protect our Mounties. What is going on? Because it looks like the RCMP are being pushed out of Halifax at the very least. And they're and like a lot of people or a lot of armies in that situation, they're losing and going, we won. This is victory in our time. It's not victory. Second part of that story looked at an ad that the RCMP put in buyandsell.gov.gc, which is where the government procurement site for the federal government, and the RCMP is looking for an outside risk manager from 12 approved firms, big accounting firms, big Babcock International, to come in on a 3-month contract and to deal with the Alert Ready system. Well, we're 60 months down the road. Now they're putting out a contract, presumably a really expensive one with a highfalutin international firms, to come and tell them how to push the button to say Alert Ready, to establish protocols, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I've talked to senior Mounties that they have all kinds of people inside of the 19,000 Mounties that we pay $5 billion a year in Canada from taxpayer money. $5 billion we're paying for second-rate policing, basically. They have they have 19,000 regular members, another 10 or 11,000 civilian members, 30,000 members. You think somebody in there would understand how to push the Alert Ready button to say, this is what we have to do? Like, for example, if I was doing it, there's a man dressed as a policeman driving a car going around shooting people, and this has been going on for 12 hours. Should we push the button or not? How complicated can it be?
Yeah, I'm shocked that it's not. And is the Alert Ready system, is that a provincial technology, something we do provincially, or is this federal?
It's right across the country now. Run by, I think it's run by Bell Alliant.
It's just something that powerful and that effective in informing the public. You would think they'd just immediately have, some kind of procedure as far as when it's used and how it's used, and that should happen very fast. It's pretty wild to me that there's any gray around it. Like, they used it for there was a situation where they had blue-green algae in some lake somewhere outside of Halifax. I got an alert for that. I got an alert reminding me to socially distance during a long weekend. I didn't get an alert as a man who's going around killing people.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the RCMP, they play everything close to the vest. B, they obviously had something to hide because it's a no-brainer what to do there. And they're going to say, well, we couldn't put out an alert because that would be, people would be calling about every police car and it'd get really, really confusing. Well, why not put out an alert that says no policemen are going to come to your door? No real policemen are going to come to your door. If one does, call 911. And meanwhile, all our police are going to be in unmarked cars. And they're going to drive around and, well, they did do that part, but then they shot up the Onslow Fire Hall, which is probably a better part.
Let's get back to your visit to Portapique. When we talked before about a past trip you had to Portapique, you talked about some of the lots that Wortman owned is now owned by someone that I believe gave you access to the property. Has there been any news about what's going on the former lots of land?
Well, he's developing some of it. He's creating some housing lots on the southern end. It's a huge property.
Have they broke ground yet? Like, has the soil been...
He's put a road in at the southern end down near where the Saul house was and going across and opened up lots there. He's got one of the lots that was owned by one of Wortman's companies on Orchard Beach Drive. I think it's his lot. It might have been the lot owned by Lisa Banfield's sister. You remember we talked about this before, the talk about this horrible relationship, but Lisa Banfield's sister bought a house, property there on Orchard Beach. I'm not sure if it's that one or the one beside it that's for sale right now. There's no lot lines. It's just woods. I have to work out in my head which one is which.
Okay.
I saw that yesterday. But the point, I'm looking at it and I was surprised because I think I underestimated the distance that Corey Ellison or Clinton Ellison would have had to travel to get to where Corey Ellison was killed. So I said, it would take him 3 or 4 minutes to get up that road. I think that's a pretty good estimate. Might even be 5 minutes to get from his father's house, because that would take a minute or so to get to the, it's in the woods, to come out to Orchard Beach Drive and go up Orchard Beach Drive 400 or 500 meters. So it's a long hike, and the timelines just don't jive. Darren Campbell said we were there at 9:49 and found his body. Doesn't make sense.
We just got a call, Paul, so I'm going to head on hold for a minute here. Let's get to them. Hey, caller, sorry to keep you waiting. How's it going?
It's going, Jordan. How are you?
It's Anne-Marie. Good first call of the night.
I forgive you for keeping me on hold for so long.
That's fine. It isn't fine. It's my apologies. But it's fine to hear from you. What are your thoughts tonight?
I just want to know from Paul if he has a view on what might become of the RCMP after this public inquiry. Like, will they be able to still police in Nova Scotia, or are they going to be disbanded? Or
Good question, Emery. We'll get into that with you off the line, but I look forward to talking to you again.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, so Paul, we talked about, it seems like, if your information is correct, that HRP may be distancing themselves from the RCMP. What do you think is going to happen after the inquiry if it doesn't go their way?
Well, first of all, I have very little confidence the inquiry is going to do anything substantive. I mean, they've so much as said, we're not doing a criminal investigation. We're not trying to find wrongdoing. They're still they have this overweighted sort of view about domestic violence. If you look at who's on the commission, they've got so many of them have credentials, domestic violence credentials, but whether it be Fitch or Stanton, who are the commissioners, or you have Barbara McLean, who's the former Toronto deputy police chief, and others who are brought in as investigators. It's all weighted that way. And, the evidence is quite going the other way, quite clearly. So what's going to happen to the RCMP? Well, it depends. Like, now we have the situation with the Conservatives have just been elected this week as the government of Nova Scotia. And, Tim Houston, I think he said virtually nothing on the campaign trail about the RCMP. Maybe he's got some sort of plan up his sleeve, but him and his party strike me as pro-police, pro-RCMP guys, which doesn't mean they're. It's basically the blind faith. They're not looking at it objectively. They don't look at the structure, the problems. That's being looked at other levels within the police force and maybe in the police directorate. That's an issue that we have to see what the government's going to do. But the big issue I see that's maybe indicative of what's going to happen is if Houston has the brains and the integrity to appoint different people as Attorney General and Solicitor General. I hate to harp on this, but you can't have proper accountability and effective oversight of the police if the Attorney General and the Solicitor General or Public Safety Minister, whatever, Justice Minister, whatever you're going to call them, if the person in charge of the police is also the head law officer of the province. So how do you bring accountability to the police? So I think, first of all, we have, and I think if he tries to do what Stephen McNeil did, and what was the name of the former premier? Rankin. What Rankin did, having the same person do both jobs, that's an outrage, and it has to be addressed. And if I have to hammer on it for every week for years, I'll keep hammering away at it. I think others should pick up that argument because it's not right. That's not the way in the parliamentary system that the jobs of the Attorney General and Solicitor General were envisaged. Last point. In classical English Parliament, the Attorney General is not part of the cabinet. He's not political. It's not a political job. He's the chief law officer charged with enforcing the rule of law across the area of the province, the state, whatever. Solicitor General is in charge of the police and corrections. Completely different job. Yeah, there's law involved, but there's a completely different job. And that's the way it should be set up. Let's see what Houston does. But I think that the third point on it is that it's going to be, there's already moves at the federal level to get the RCMP out of contract policing. I mean, there are studies going on. This has happened for the last 20 to 25 years, but it's at the point now where the RCMP is unsustainable in its present form. And that's not me saying that, that's recent reports saying that. And they can't attract enough new recruits. They're getting too expensive with their new union contract. Every constable's going to get a $20,000 raise.
I saw that. That's shocking. It's
making it too expensive a police force, and they're not, frankly, very good at what they do. So it's up to the politicians to wake up and analyze this situation and read the writing on the wall that this has to change. And the RCMP will say, and they have said where this has been contemplated elsewhere in the past, that we have all this infrastructure here, and they talk like they're a company. And if you're going to take us over, you're going to have to buy all our buildings and all our cars, and you're going to have to hire new people. You're going to do this. I'm sorry. The right hand, the right hand, my right pocket, I pay the provincial government taxes. The left pocket, I pay the federal government. I'm still paying for it. Mm-hmm. It's mine, taxpayers.
Yeah. And I hear a lot of cities, like municipalities, cities have their own municipal police forces. What provinces have provincial police? Saskatchewan does.
No.
Do they not?
Ontario and Quebec.
Ontario and Quebec are the only two?
The only two. Ontario, OPP, Ontario Provincial Police. Quebec was certified to Quebec. The RCMP started contract policing in Saskatchewan and Alberta in 1905.
Okay.
And, when they were the Northwest Mounted Police then. And then a whole bunch of political things happened to basically get them to be the provincial police in all these other provinces. Like they took over from the BC provincial police in 1950 in a very sort of curious backroom deal where they moved out the provincial police. And, Nova Scotia used to have its own provincial police force until the Great Depression in the 1930s.
Oh, really? I wasn't aware of that.
Well, every province had their own provincial police force during that period. And then the last point on this is that the RCMP likes to, comport itself as a symbol of Canada and this well-loved, great historic entity. Well, if you go back in government in the early 1900s, Louis Saint Laurent wanted to get rid of the RCMP because they were not very good at what they did.
Got a caller here. Hey, caller, how's it going?
Not too bad, you?
Oh, doing good. What's on your mind tonight?
Well, I know we're talking about the RCMP and whether they're going to be around a lot later, but I'd like to get back more to what happened that night and the aftermath and the screw up of what happened. So, what did Paul find out? Or has he ever heard about all the days after the massacre where the RCMP had approximately 12 officers searching the Wentworth Valley behind the Wentworth Market for several days, and the community up there was wondering what the heck's going on, never got any information. And the other thing is the link between McLeod and Griffin. I've read in Paul's previous article they were cousins, they were very close, there's some biker connections and all that. One guy was a prison guard, one was a biker. Why was Griffin evacuated that night? And why is McLeod Murray? What's he hearing on that?
Okay, we'll answer that with you off the air. Thanks for your call.
Thanks.
So he had two main questions there. The first is about a search in the Wentworth area that I wasn't familiar with. Do you know the story there?
On the morning of the 19th, after Wortman left DeBert, or allegedly left DeBert, it's hard to know what happened there. He was spotted in the parking lot of the Wentworth Market, which is on Highway 4, just on the other side of Folly Mountain. When you're going up towards, I guess, Hunter Road. It's about a 7-minute drive from Hunter Road, 7-8 minutes maybe. And he was in the lot. He was seen in the lot in behind there because the Wentworth Market, they call it the mall up there, but really all it is a store, a gas station. And then it has this weird like Quonset Hut liquor store coming out the north side of it. It sort of looks like a parasite digging into the building, and he's in behind there, and they don't know why he was in behind there. So they were searching that area to find out anything, much like they searched the area behind the welding shop in DeBert, and they went through the woods there. I mean, there's still ribbons. I was up there a couple of weeks ago. There's still ribbons in the woods everywhere where they mark things with evidence. And at Portapique, there's still ribbons in the woods from their searches there. So I don't know. They're looking for whatever they're looking for. I don't know what they found because they don't tell us.
Yeah, but in DeBert, we know some of what they found there behind that like machine shop or whatever it is he parked behind. How did that information get out? Well,
that was in the ITOs.
Okay,
so
of course.
The bottom of like on page 88 of one of the ITOs, they said we did this and we found the knucks there, a pair of knucks along with this, and a belt, a Sam Brown belt, and some riding boots and things like that. So they're looking up, naturally they're looking up there to see what he might have dropped off in Wentworth. I've always wondered why he was there, because one of the, segueing into what we're talking about, the McLeod, one of the things that has always intrigued me, the RCMP, is that he didn't have a phone. But we do know, or I do know, I don't know if I've talked about this, I think I may have written about it, that Alana Jenkins was up around 6:30. And how do we know that? She texted someone about a baby paraphernalia item that the person was looking for and saying she had something that she could give her. So that was like roughly, it's something like a minute or 2 minutes before Wortman passed the camera coming up Hunter Road.
Okay.
So did he know she was up? Did she know he was coming? Did she know what was going on? Because she was up. And I've got that from witnesses and talked to people, and that's going to be in the book. The relationship between McLeod and Griffin.
So, and just for people who don't know all the names, Griffin was the man who lived in the Portapique area with a questionable background that is long thought and speculated to be well connected to Wortman. He was evacuated very early on, and then the McLeod is one of the victims the next morning. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, well, Peter Allen Griffin in 2014 was arrested in Edmonton on drug trafficking and was said to be had weapons. He had weapons as well, and he was described as an associate of La Familia, which is the Mexican drug cartel, and MS-13, which is the notorious El Salvadoran street gang. And between the lines, you couldn't be a drug trafficker in Alberta without a connection to the Hells Angels, as they pretty well run everything out west in that regard. And he was charged and then convicted in 2017, I believe, and then shortly after, around 2018, he was paroled and allowed to come back to Nova Scotia to live with his parents in Portapique. He's a the parents and Griffin were longtime friends with Wortman. From the time they first started, they built their house in Portapique around, I think it was around 2005. So they're longtime associates. And then the Griffins, Peter Griffin's mother was an acquaintance or friend of the Merceros, who were also Hells Angels back in Dartmouth, and they were murdered back around 1999, 2001. Then Peter Griffin was working with Wortman as a handyman, a drinking buddy. He's the guy who put the decals on the car, dressed it up as an RCMP car.
He made the decal, like he worked in a print shop or whatever, and made the decal. Shop,
and he's the guy, and he learned about how to do this stuff about decals in prison as his prison job, and he came out and put it to good use.
It's just shocking how mixed up in so many things this guy is.
And he's not apparently like a tough guy or anything like that. He's actually pretty soft, apparently. People who know him saying he's not a hard-nosed criminal, more a follower than a leader. Then he was his mother and Sean McLeod's mother were I believe they're sisters. Might have been cousins. I think they're sisters or cousins. I can't remember. But effectively, they were brought up as first cousins. I think they're either actually first cousins or their second cousins were brought up as first cousins. Very, very close. And Sean McLeod, was working in the jail. He, by all accounts, he was a reputable guy, a hard-nosed guy who, he was a keeper, which means, that's an old-fashioned term for the kind of job he did. He was in charge of a unit at Spring Hill. Alana was in charge. She was a keeper at the Nova Institution in Truro, the Women's Institution. The only thing that stands out about McLeod, and people have pointed this out, is that he seemed to have a lot of money for his job. and I've even had people very close to Alana and Sean say like they had lots of money. It was hard to explain to their eyes, and these are people who were very close to them. Said it was suspicious, especially because Sean McLeod had gone through 2 marriages, and Alana was his third, and Alana had been through, as I said, she was an experienced third wife because she'd gone through 2 marriages. So that's not the kind of situation where people usually have a lot of money. But he had a gorgeous house on a gorgeous property, all the toys, all that stuff. And and to be fair to him, we don't know. The Corrections Canada has early on they were asked, was there any kind of internal investigation that was either targeting McLeod or Jenkins, or which they were a part of in a sting operation of some sort? And they said they know of nothing. So they declined to say. They didn't say there was anything. I can't find out anything. So I don't know what was going on. I mean, the speculation, there's all kinds of speculation that, maybe McLeod was, ratted on Wortman, and that's why Wortman got his revenge. And then there's other things to go with Alana Jenkins. It's hard to know at this point until somebody tells us more.
Yeah, exactly. And so many people who talk about this story and Wortman's motivation and Wortman's connections, the idea of the Hells Angels and biker gangs, it comes up all the time. Is the source of that primarily due to Griffin's connection to Wortman and to drug trafficking, likely the Hells Angels? Like, what else other than Griffin connects this story to motorcycle gangs? Is there any kind of main thing?
Well, there are sources who say there's something really big. When you look at what big in the context of the RCMP in Nova Scotia, it's usually motorcycle gangs. If you look at Portapique, that's a lot of motorcycle gang activity over the years there. Different murder victims, you had the Merceros that I just mentioned were associated with that area. People involved in the murders of the Mercero were from that area. And some are even related to some of the victims, some of the killers. So there's bikers all over the place on this. There's a bike gang up in whatever the name of that place, it escapes my mind right now, just to the north of there. There's a biker gang. Then if you look at in the police I talked to, say that this has the hallmarks of an undercover operation gone wrong. And this is where I got accused way back being a conspiracy theorist, because this has the hallmarks. I didn't say it is. It just looks like it. And if you look at this kind of a situation that blows up like this, if this was a blown undercover operation or blown operation of some sort, what happened just before and just after in the policing world? And what happened just before on April 10th was a culmination of a series of biker raids in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, where they arrested two Hells Angels, 2 Red Devils in New Brunswick. And that alone right there, it suggested that was the end of an operation and things went south. And at the end of an operation, as they're winding things down, that's when things can fall apart. And that's part of the thinking. That's one scenario. But the thing about it, Jordan, we're 16 months down the road and it hasn't gone away. If it was a false lead, we wouldn't be talking about it, but it's still there. It's still not to be put away.
Got another call here. Sorry to interrupt the episode like this, but I want to take a moment and tell you about something I just posted to the Nighttime Premium feed. But before I do, let me start by telling you that there is in fact a separate and much better nighttime podcast feed than the one you're listening to now. It's available exclusively at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. The premium feed costs about as much as a bag of chips, but I would argue that it is more satisfying than any salty crunch could ever be. First, the premium feed funds the creation of the show, so if you enjoy nighttime, you have the patron subscribers to thank for keeping the show alive. Secondly, that feed, the premium feed, is a lot less annoying. Since it's listener funded, there's no needs for ads like this or any of the others you heard. And lastly, the premium feed includes exclusive episodes and bonus content you won't find here on the free feed. Shortly after the release of this episode, I'll be releasing another in which I discuss Gabriel Wortman's denture business. If you're following this story, that bonus content may very well be up your alley. So if you're interested in subscribing to the premium feed, visit patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. I should also mention that all annual subscribers receive a nighttime swag pack, so things like the Listen to Paul Palango and Nova Scotia Wants Answers stickers and pins will be included. Again, you can go premium at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. Now let's get back to the episode. Hey, caller, sorry to keep you waiting. Well, how's it going?
Great. I kind of have two questions. One is, I've never heard of police throwing their weapons, their guns, in the woods, especially when we have a killer loose, in 2 incidents. And my second major question is, it was just briefly, I've been on this since it started, that terrible morning of April 19th. But wasn't there alerts sent to U.S. citizens? And who would have sent that? Since no one in Nova Scotia knew about it, but U.S. citizens knew before anybody else. Unless, of course, you had your Twitter up.
Yeah, of course. As all rural Nova Scotians, I'm sure, did that early that morning and late the night prior. All right, we'll chat that off. Chat that out off air. So thanks for calling. Great questions.
Great, thanks. Have a good night.
You too. You got that, Paul?
Refresh me on the first one. I had got distracted there.
The big thing, the second one is what stuck in my mind. And as I'm talking about it, I'll remember what the first part was. I thought you were getting up to get a paper and pen because you always write the questions.
Yeah, I was, and I got distracted by an ant.
Oh my goodness. Hopefully not a carpenter ant. I've been dealing with that. But let's answer the first one, or talk about the first one, or the second
one was the U.S. consulate put up.
Yeah, what is this? What was the story there? Because I remember hearing about this.
Was aware of what was going on and monitoring the situation, and that there's a gunman loose, and they put out an alert to U.S. citizens. So
is that like U.S. citizens in Canada would have gotten an alert from the U.S.
U.S. students, anyone who was registered with the U.S. government knew what was going on, and a lot of Canadians, a lot of people in Nova Scotia found out about what was going on from their U.S. friends.
Why is that not a bigger deal? That's it. Like, as I'm just taking it in now, that strikes me as a big deal.
Yeah, it's, the RCMP was still thinking about what to say. It went 13 and a half hours. He's killing people, and they were still trying to figure out what to say, which tells you right there's something wrong with their story, because their reaction is not natural.
The first part of her question escapes me. So I'm sure a lot of people remember it. Someone will put it in the chat and we'll come back and answer that, the first part of the question. I got another caller here though. Hey caller, sorry to keep you on hold. How's it going?
Hey Jordan, how's it going? Mr. Shake Harbor here.
Hey
Paul. Great to be tuned in and listen to this series so far.
You say Mr. Shag Harbor. Is this Brock?
Yeah, Brock. Yeah.
the one of 3 people I know from there. Cool. What's on your mind? What are your thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to say I've been meaning to talk to you for quite a while, and I just really haven't had something that I was that passionate about. But this series has been really captivating me, and I've been thinking a lot about it. And something that I wanted to call in and just kind of, get on my mind or off my mind is recently, you touched on it earlier, the riots that were in Halifax. We heard reports of police officers removing their name tags and identification. And after what happened at Portapique, I think that was a really insensitive and short-sighted move on behalf of HRP. And, police officers, after what happened, should be doing everything that they can to identify themselves as police officers. And, I don't know what your guys' thoughts are. I'd really like to get Paul's take on it and yours, Jordan.
Definitely, buddy. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I should have thought of that earlier when Paul and I were talking about it. And I hope I see you at the UFO festival in, I think, early October.
Yeah, you betcha, Jordan.
Awesome, buddy.
We'll get you there. All right.
We'll catch up soon. Bye-bye. So we'll answer that, then we'll get back to her first question, which...
The thing about them taking off their name tags and stuff is really outrageous. And you have, it gets back to what I was saying before about accountability. The police in Nova Scotia know that they are not accountable. And how do we know that? Well, we've got CERT, which basically we've proven already lied in the Fifth Caccione. They're not going to investigate or do anything that's really outrageous. They go along with what the police want. That's what's happened. And secondly, it gets back to the Attorney General, Solicitor General thing. If the same person is doing both jobs, do you think they're going to prosecute the police on anything like this? No. It's up to the Attorney General to do that. And when you have that situation, what? I'm going to charge you. No, you're not. No, you're not. Yes, I am. I'm not. Okay, let's go home. Let's go have a beer. It's outrageous that that people would go along with this. And Nova Scotia's going, well, these are our betters. We know they know what they're doing, Or I believe in Stephen McNeil. He's a good guy. Well,
I think to me it says so much that more than I could see maybe one police officer in the middle of all this scuffle, maybe their tag gets ripped off or they put body armor over and accidentally cover up their name tag or something. If that happened to one or two cops, I could see it as a coincidental thing. But if it looks like police are intentionally hiding their name tag, that says so much to me about what's going on. And then the other debate was a lot of police officers during these police activity in downtown Halifax to remove the homeless encampment. There was a lot of discussion about police wearing a thin blue line badge, which is a badge. What is the controversy surrounding that? I'm sure you're familiar with this.
It's, the problem with the police, the problem we have is that they're all right wing. Well, not all, but most of them. And they're extremely right wing. And they've got a bunker mentality. They only associate with each other. Everyone is the enemy. It's your typical sort of closed-minded bunker mentality, and it's us against them. And they've forgotten the precept of modern policing. If you go back to Robert Peel and his successors, is that the police are the public and the public are the police. And it's a civilian police force. It's not a military police force. People don't understand the difference. So they're us and we're them, but they've lost that. They see themselves as this force that's under attack, and everyone is the enemy, and they've got to be suspicious of them, and they can only trust each other.
And that's what the thin blue line patch represents, is this sort of brotherhood.
Thin blue line, and then you got sort of the people in the in everyday society who basically perpetuate this with, our first responders can do no wrong. They're our heroes. They put them up on a pedestal. Well, yeah, policing can be a dangerous job, but it ain't as dangerous being a fisherman or a truck driver or a construction worker. You're way down the list of dangerous jobs, and you're better paid than all of them. So, it's like I don't have a lot of sympathy for the mentality, but the police have become overwhelmed generally by this extreme right-wing militaristic attitude, and they're not the people. So if you don't want to defund the police. You want to sort of reorient the police, but you also at the same time have to reorient society itself so it understands the role of the police. I mean, part of the problem we have is that our school systems don't teach kids what police are or what they should be or how society should work. They don't understand civics. They don't understand any of these things, and this is the problem we're having.
The question we missed earlier was about the police officers hiding and throwing their guns during that night. And we talked a little bit about that before, but do you want to comment on it? Like, what do you make of this? Can you think of other examples of police hiding or throwing guns into the woods?
I've never heard of it before, but the more I look at it and I talk to people about it, the first incident with the gun going in the woods is the corporal in Portapique, who's like the third person at the scene. Mm-hmm. And in Darren Campbell's statement, he says two officers went down the road. They're joined by a third. And this is all by 10:49. And I do know from independent reporting that the corporal at some point hides in the woods and throws her gun away. So why did she do that? And we don't know what happened and what the great fear was, but we do know there are questions about Corey Ellison being shot, and that police I've talked to and ex-police, like senior investigators, all look at the same thing. They said that's reasonable and probable cause. All those facts together, the timing, her throwing her gun away, all that stuff should be subject to a separate criminal investigation.
Mm-hmm. And if there was a gun that if you could test the ballistics of one gun against the bullet that killed Corey Ellison, would that be the gun?
I would test her gun, or I'd want to know if she got a new gun. Mm-hmm. Because they have one of the things that happens in bad situations is they'll try to trade in their gun and get a different gun. But they do have records of the guns, and they should be tested and all of this stuff. But again, the problem is they played around with so much stuff here. The CERT report was bogus on Onslow. The CERT report on Wortman's death was bogus. There was no CERT investigation of the entire thing. We know from sources that they're playing with evidence. They're doing all kinds of things. We know for the 911 tapes, they lied. We know for the Wortman shooting, they lied. So even if we got ballistics reports now, how can we trust them?
I'm seeing Woods Fanatic. Someone in the chat says, "Can you imagine being in the woods that night with a shooter on the loose and throwing your gun away?" And yeah, just as I read that comment, I just tried to put myself in the position of the police officer who is surrounded by burning homes, bodies on the ground. There's a shooter on the loose somewhere, and you decide to check your gun.
I was talking to someone in Portapique yesterday. We said, that night the wind was howling, because it usually does howl there because of the tides, and it was bitterly cold. Like exactly the points I made when we talked about Banfield. Who was out there hiding anywhere? It was not a nice night out there at midnight or 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. The tide had just come in, and the tide there runs about 28 feet. That creates quite a wind.
Yeah. Well, unless you got anything else, I'm looking at the time. We should start wrapping this up soon. What should we expect for your next article in Frank? What are you working on now? If you can give anything up.
Andrew's taking a couple of weeks off, so you're probably not going to have much of me in the next week or two.
I thought you were about to say, so he's giving me the keys.
No, I don't want the keys because I got to work on other things. But one of the things I'd like, people up, like, it was really good. Last week we asked the question about Whiskey's Bar in Dartmouth.
Oh, I got an update for that. But what do you got to say about it?
And that we got people from the bar who basically said they didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, I've heard from two separate. So for people who didn't catch last week's, we had a caller give us a tip that Wortman was thought to be have had an interaction with either the manager or the owner of a bar in Dartmouth, in that involved Wortman threatening to kill him, and as a result being banned for life from this bar. I we did the call out on the show, and I heard from two separate staff of that. Both said they had never heard of, him in connection with the bar, and they didn't believe the story to be true. But both of the people that I spoke to had been working there for less than 7 years, and both said, like, if it did happen, it happened a long time ago. And and people talk. So if you work somewhere, and even if like three employees ago, this infamous, well-known mass shooter was involved, the story would be passed down. So to me, that led me to think that this story maybe didn't have a lot to it, or was a misunderstanding perhaps, or exaggeration.
Well, it's like a lot of Wortman stories. As I pointed out last week, that in the ITOs, the RCMP said described the incident in Holton, Maine, where Lisa Banfield was driving the truck and hit a moose, and they had to stay there and all this thing. But it turned out that was in 2004. It's not relevant to what was going on. So as I'm looking forward, my assignment for our listeners tonight is I'm really interested in New Brunswick still. And we had tips this week about Wortman like to hang around a strip club called Angie's in Moncton.
I don't know if I must have got a message from someone different, but I got the same tip from someone. I wonder if it's the same person.
Well,
we'll talk
they're
often.
obviously trying to reach out. So, okay, I'm not going to Moncton, but is there someone up there who's listening or knows people or in that world? Did Wortman hang around there? Because it fits with, he did a lot of things in New Brunswick, had a lot of activity in New Brunswick. And, as I said, the Saulnier case is going on there. I'm going to keep an eye on that. And finally, University of New Brunswick. It's my understanding that Wortman, one of the people on the commission, and the top-ranking Mountie all went to UNB at the same time. It's not a huge school. Did they know each other? Simple as that. I've got pictures of Wortman doing this and that. I've got all kinds of stories about Wortman being at UNB. But I want to look at that. And then finally, in the last part of my story this week, I have, if you got to the bottom, the story of the threesome, where a Mountie was involved with three Mounties got entangled on a foreign trip. And the point of the story is this. Let's see, well, why would you put such a salacious story in there? Because it shows the decay of the force. That an inspector comes back and tells his superiors that I got entangled with a couple of underlings, so to speak, after some wine, and all these nasty things happened. And then when the underlings were confronted, one of them basically went out of their way to virtually blackmail the inspector. And they all get promoted in the end. This is the RCMP story. But the point of the whole thing is that I think the RCMP should know that me and you and all the people out here listening, if they roll over in bed and say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, one of us is going to hear about it, and we'll report it. And why are we doing that? Well, it goes back to one of the things I learned at the Globe and Mail. One of the first things I learned at the Globe and Mail when I worked there was, I said, do we have an ethics code here? Like, what's our ethics code? Nowadays they'll have, like, the CBC will have like an ethical code of biblical proportions. You can do this, you can do that, da, da, da. The Globe and Mail, we had a simple ethical code. You can do anything you want, say anything you want, take anything you want, as long as you're comfortable reading about it on the front page of the newspaper.
I like it.
But that's the ethical code that I'm applying to the RCMP now. If it was good enough for the Globe and Mail, it's good enough for you. Good night.
I like it.
Thank you.
Good way to end it, Paul. We'll talk again soon. I want to thank you for joining Paul and I in our discussion surrounding the Nova Scotia shooting and arson rampage. For anyone interested in taking part in our live chats, we do these on the Nighttime Podcast YouTube channel every Sunday night at about 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 9:15 p.m. Atlantic Time. And with that, I'll wrap up this episode of Nighttime, but before we part, I'm going to give some thanks. First, a big thanks to Paul for again sharing his evening with me and with the listeners of Nighttime. Another big thanks goes out to Monty Data, who contributed the music for this episode. It's a piece called Noir Tokyo. And lastly, a massive thank you to everyone who listens to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, the show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. But with that said, keeping the show alive is and has always been an uphill battle. So if you want to help the show out and keep it going, listen on the premium feed. You can subscribe at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And with that said, let me thank the newest subscribers of the premium feed. Kevin, Megan, and my sidekick Anne-Marie, thank you for your generous support. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show but can't do it financially, you can give me a big hand by simply sharing the episodes on social media or letting like-minded friends know what we're doing here. If you have any story ideas or if you want to give me feedback on the episodes, you can find me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or of course on the Nighttime Podcast YouTube channel. So until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte. Copyright Jordan Bonaparte.
Hey True Crime listeners, we're the hosts of True North True Crime, a uniquely Canadian crime podcast.
Today's fast-paced news cycle makes it common for a murder or a missing person case to fall quickly out of the headlines.
True North True Crime voices those stories that still need to be heard.
Each episode is a standalone deep dive into a case that has impacted a community in Canada.
With a fact-based and victim-centered approach, True North True Crime reports on murder investigations, trial outcomes, and the unique details of each missing persons case.
So if you're looking for a new podcast, listen and subscribe to True North True Crime wherever you listen to podcasts.